Hello and welcome to Newsmakers on CHCH Podcasts. I'm your host, Louie Butko, and on today's show, I'm very pleased to welcome Ward 3 Councillor Nrinder Nann to the program. Councillor Nann is currently in her second term, having first been elected in 2018, becoming the first woman of color to be elected to Hamilton City Council. Prior to being elected, in addition to being a community activist, Nann was the former manager of community development at the City of Toronto, as well as working at director-level positions for the Labour movement, and has cited adequate and affordable housing, better streets, and value for tax dollars as her top priorities. And so there are no shortage of topics to dive into with the councillor. Councillor, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
We do have to start with some breaking news that's happening today. There's a lockdown at Bernie Custis. It is in your ward for the second day in a row. What's going on?
It's super concerning, and I have to say I'm really thankful to Hamilton Police Services as well as the school administration for following all the appropriate safety protocols. First and foremost, in those kind of situations, it's the safety and well-being of our students as well as the local community as well. So, I've heard a lot already from residents in the neighborhood who want to better understand what's going on and want some accountability in terms of what is the school going to be able to do and what kind of partnerships are needed to support the school, to support the student body. If it is, found to be true that this is potentially activity linked to, the proliferation of illegal substances, then that's a serious concern for the well-being of all of our students. And I think in partnership with, like as I mentioned, police services, but also our addiction and mental health support workers and agencies, we really need to be careful as a community to really ensure that we're providing the supports that our youth need right now, who are honestly reeling from the impacts of 3 years of a pandemic and then subsequently a system that is not ramped up in the capacity it needs to really wrap around our young people with the supports that they need to thrive.
Well, I used to work for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, so I was around, obviously that area a lot. And, that school did take so much pride in, the diversity of the school, getting to celebrate, brand new athletics programs, really being proud of Bernie Custis and what everything he represents.
Absolutely.
Doesn't something like this, how do we move past it? And how do we not associate Bernie Custis with the events of the past 2 days? How can we focus more on the positive things that are happening at that school?
I think that's exactly the right question to be asking, right? These kinds of emergency incidences aren't unique to Bernie Custis. We've had lockdowns occurring in every high school across the municipality, and sometimes even scarier situations. So from that perspective, I think it's really important that we approach this from a Hamilton perspective, that we're not stigmatizing specific schools as being problem populations or anything like that. We're not helping the situation when we do that. I think I'm really looking forward to a really robust conversation with our trustee, the parent council there, and really starting to, support that community and celebrate all the achievements that are there, because there are some stars in that school, right? Everything from the arts community right into the sports community that attend Bernie Custis, and we've got scholarship winners, we've got academic achievers in that student population. We also have kids who volunteer on a regular basis in their local neighborhoods and food banks. And this is a student body that deserves to be celebrated. And you make a really good point there. Yeah.
Well put. Let's talk about Ward 3, because the uniqueness of it, obviously, again, I've spent a lot of time in that ward with my previous employment. What are the issues that you're hearing door to door right now? What are people concerned about in Ward 3 and across the city you're hearing from?
Yeah, so the second door knock in 2022 unveiled the same two top issues, number one being road safety. And then number two being around housing affordability, as more and more residents were facing the pinch. I heard from so many tenants who are renting in Ward 3 about their inability to keep up with the rents that are going up, and real desperate concern that if they were served an eviction notice, where would they go, especially having to leave a community where their family is already situated and connected, and the prospects of losing that kind of neighborhood that is so much part of their identity and well-being. In terms of roadway safety, And still, Hamiltonians are driving far too fast on our roadways. And, last term I invested several hundreds of thousands of dollars in roadway safety initiatives. And this year, my last motion will be yet another $350,000 into traffic calming solutions out of Ward 3 discretionary funds to help address the cut-through traffic and the way in which people are just driving.
I find
So
trucks,
bananas.
the trucks, and was there not a bylaw put in place that was
Oh my God,
to prevent trucks? Because I drive from Niagara every day, and I go over the Skyway at 7:30 in the morning, and yes, sometimes I will take Nikola Tesla Boulevard as an alternate, just not be stopped. But the amount of commercial traffic that I'm seeing in your ward, not just Nikola Tesla, it's Gage, it's Barton, it's what can you do to fix that when we've already put these bylaws in place to prevent it?
Yeah, so we're at the stage where we need increased enforcement of our roadways and specifically violations of our truck route. We have an incident where there is a trucking company that insists on continuing to go down a residential road, and to the point that their trucks can't actually make the turn. They number one, should not be on the road. Those roads are not designed for big trucks. And so they're coming around these corners and they're literally hitting buildings and hitting the curbs and causing infrastructure damage, not only on, in terms of a cost to the municipality, but also to the private building owner. And, we've tried knocking on the door of the company. We're getting nowhere. Our economic development office has tried knocking on the door. The neighbors have tried knocking on the door. And they're just continuing to, blatantly violate our bylaw. So at this point, I feel like I have no other choice but to put in more bylaws, get more signs up saying this is not a permissible truck route. And I got to say, it's not just those kinds of one-off incidents. It's also where families are complaining about, the trucks are coming in and rolling through and rumbling their entire homes. And these are roads that the trucks should not be on. These are not trucks that are making local deliveries, which is permissible. So I think we have some rework to do as a municipality. And I know that Councillor Crutch in Ward 2 is also getting a flurry of these complaints. So I look forward to our next conversation. And I have the privilege of chairing the Truck Routes Committee. So we have
the number of trucks I have followed or been stuck behind. Through Nikola Tesla, through the downtown streets. And you mentioned, a lot of these houses, they're older houses. When you talk about basically from Nikola Tesla to, Barton, basically, there's a lot of older infrastructure, older neighborhoods. And it's definitely nice to know that you're on it.
Yeah.
That's something that's always bothered me. And having this show, it's I don't want to get too specific here as we're talking about specific side streets. But it is one of those things that what is being done about it? And to hear something like that, yes, there are bylaws in place, but I heard a story from the Toronto Metropolitan University that said 99.7% of traffic infractions go unpunished just on a stretch of King Street in Toronto. So where does more enforcement come in? How can we get there?
Yeah, I'd like to examine that question with our Hamilton Police Services as well as our transportation planning team because, council did approve a budget increase to Hamilton Police Services a few years back to increase the number of officers for traffic violations specifically because it's a citywide problem, not just the trucks, it's also all of the dangerous driving that's happening. And so if we've reinvested all this public dollar into this enforcement, we need to hear more about why that enforcement isn't meeting the actual violations that are occurring. The truck route, though, quickly. So we did a whole revamp, right? So now there's green roads and red roads, and there's a permissible truck route now. And what would be really great is to move to that next level and working with some smart technology, as well as all the trucking companies that are based in Hamilton and those that come through Hamilton to the industrial North End, as well as throughout the city, so that they're very clear and their drivers are very clear. That is right there in front of their screens where they should not be going. Otherwise, you will be ticketed.
There you go. It's interesting. I wasn't planning on going down that road. Pardon the pun, excuse me. But while we're on transportation, yesterday, the Red Hill report. This is your second term on council. You had been on council when you became aware of the existence of this previous report. obviously some pretty harrowing information released yesterday. As a councillor where you are, what was your reaction to what you heard yesterday?
Yeah, I really did just think about all the families that were connected to fatalities or injuries on the road. And honestly, just like a lot of yesterday, I spent a lot of time thinking about those families. I still have to do my due diligence of reading the entire report. It's a pretty hefty report.
78 pages.
78 pages. And I will continue my due diligence to make sure that every recommendation that's in that report gets implemented.
What have you, it seems that this council, I've seen it before, Mayor Horvath apologizing for something that she didn't really have anything to do with. She did it on the Shadoke Creek settlement. She's doing it in the Red Hill Valley report.
Yep.
Is that a collective consensus of council? Is that regardless of the past mistakes others have made, we are the ones who now have to accept it?
Well, isn't that the sign of a good leader, right? And isn't that the sign of good leadership? That when you've assumed a decision-making power, that you take responsibility of the organization that you're now a governor for. So regardless of previous members who were governors at that time, the responsibility is now on our shoulders. And so, what value is there? Is there a lot of value in blaming past councils or blaming past staff when we're dealing with the reality today? I think it's important from an accountability perspective that we absolutely acknowledge and attribute blame where blame needs to be attributed. But, real leaders, what we do is we look at the situation that's in front of us today and commit ourselves to the future. I think we haven't had enough apologies from elected officials across all levels of government when mistakes have been made and it's directly impacted the health of our people and the health of our environment. I think that kind of accountability and that kind of authenticity is something that all residents are looking for. I look for that from my other political representatives, right? Whether it's the Prime Minister of our country or it's my local MP or MPP. I think it's really, we got to remain human in these jobs. Well,
your local MPP has been in the headlines a bit lately. You obviously have Sarah Jama pretty well.
I do.
What's your advice to her? What have you been saying to her? She seems to be in a tough spot right now.
I mean, I don't have advice for her. I think I've been very consistently, vocal about the scenario that she's been placed into. I think it's really unfortunate set of circumstances that have led to her being kicked out of the caucus of the New Democratic Party. I think it's really unfortunate that she's been censored, especially when we take a look at where public opinion is on the issue right now. Everywhere globally, people are calling for a ceasefire, and these humanitarian pauses that are enabling hostages to be freed is not enough. Like, we need to actually stop the bombardment and stop the violence and actually get to a place of understanding that serious, deep harm is being caused, and we have an obligation to pursue peace and an obligation to pursue justice. And those of us who are elected to every level of government are turned to by our residents in these really difficult times where bloodlines are literally attached to soil by some of our neighbors in Palestine and in Israel, that it's so critical for us as elected representatives of each level to be able to represent our constituents who are Israeli Canadian and Palestinian Canadian. And number one, stand with them and beside them with their hearts right now. And then number two, balance out the demands that are being made here locally in that international issue. So from that perspective, like if we were to apply what happened to MPP Sarah Jama in October and November compared to where we are today with public opinion, there was no reason for her to have been censored.
And we were talking to Keith Leslie on this show. He believes that there might be a path that, MPP Jama could be let back in, but it might come with conditions. Would you get the sense that she'd be open to something like that?
You'd really have to ask her. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate your insights on it for sure. As someone who represents the same ward and as someone who is a constituent of MPP Jama, let's stay with the MPP theme. Queen's Park. You were at Queen's Park yesterday. You, along with Mayor Horvath, as a Hamilton contingency, went to Queen's Park. We got the nice picture there, meeting with Housing Minister Paul Calandra. The City of Hamilton and housing with the Ontario government, as of late, in the last year or so, Greenbelt, urban boundaries. It seems it's been at odds. Is that a fair statement that the city and the province have been at odds when it comes to housing in the city?
I mean, we oppose the decisions that the province has been forcing on us as a municipality. We've stood ground for what's squarely our responsibility in terms of effective city building and planning. Like that, those decisions have been historically and structurally on the square shoulders of council to make decisions about. And so to have had that superseding kind of role being played by the province without the adequate consultation, I think that's the part where the province messed up, is that they really did not do the adequate consultation with council, let alone with our local communities prior to making some of their decisions. So I wouldn't say that we're at odds. I think that what we're saying is a difference between a clear understanding of the crisis we're facing right now and being able to name the affordability crisis as one that's acute on the side of, we've got 1,600 people who are literally on a list who are chronically unhoused in Hamilton. Right?
1,600.
1,600. We've got 300 people living in encampments that are known to the municipality.
Yeah.
We've got over 6,500 people who are on a wait list to get into social and rent geared towards income housing, plus another 2,000 that are coming in behind that. So when you look at the magnitude of the number of people who on this side of the spectrum are in a crisis level intervention necessary, all hands on deck, let's solve this problem over here. And we've got a province that's focusing on the private development side of the spectrum of housing and saying that we need to open up private sector stock and enable more sprawl and enable more new communities that then end up putting more pressure on municipalities in terms of infrastructure and servicing of those newer communities, versus saying it is so much more economical for the city and the province and the feds to work collaboratively on an infill project. Let's use the urban boundaries that exist today. Let's use the underutilized lands that are within our municipality and actually help take care of those for whom housing is a health issue, and open up the spectrum as it relates to mid-income housing all the way up to those sprawl-based mansions.
Productive meeting?
It was a productive meeting. I think it's always important when you can sit down and talk about facts, talk about reality, acknowledge that there's a role for all levels of government to play, acknowledge that the municipality has put $70 million into affordable housing. That is a significant increase year after year for the last couple of years that we've made as a city trying to address this issue. We need the feds in the province, at the very least, to come through, not just in a matching perspective, but like they need to be superseding us. Expecting municipalities to be able to pay for affordable housing based on our residential tax base is, we talk about it in our inside baseball game as regressive form of taxation. What we need to be working on is how do we take a share of income tax, sales tax, other fiscal revenue generation tools that allow our municipalities to succeed. Because if we're not succeeding at a city level, we're never going to succeed at a provincial and fed level.
We've talked about the amount of downloading that the province has done in terms of projects that they used to finance that are now coming to municipalities, the effective Bill 23. And you mentioned those other tools. Interesting to have you again within the last week because last week, vacant home tax, everything seemed, there was still a page on the website, on the Hamilton website. What happened?
Oh, yeah. So what happened is a real procedural anomaly. So City Council is governed by a procedural bylaw.
Through the chair.
Yeah, through the chair.
Yes, and I've sat through enough municipal meetings to know that you can never directly talk to someone.
No, you got to go
through
the chair.
you, the chair. I'm going to ask a question of the person on my left.
Right.
Yes, I'm aware.
So those procedural bylaws, aside from like code of conduct and how we need to like manage our meetings in interaction with each other, the procedural bylaw also very clearly stipulates that council cannot vote down a bylaw that is enabling a council-approved policy. So it's actually procedurally out of order for council to have voted on the bylaw to oppose and defeat it. In that moment, what should have happened, the meeting should have been paused. Everybody should have been made aware of the procedural bylaw. And If the current and acting chair had a direct conflict from being able to participate in the process, the chair should have been passed over to the deputy mayor, and the deputy mayor should have been walked through the procedure of what to do with the situation. And so in that situation, if you do have folks on council that are like, okay, sometimes our bylaw, maybe there is a reason to oppose a bylaw. In order to do that procedurally, we first have to reconsider the original direction for the tax policy to be created, which would require 2/3 majority, which is also a moment for us to pause in our meeting to be like, oh, wait, we're reconsidering something. It requires 2/3 of us to agree that we're reconsidering the original direction. Hang on, everybody pay attention, right?
I'm trying.
What are we doing here?
I need to take notes here, actually.
And then we go forward. So I'm sorry to get into the inside baseball procedural, but you asked me what happened, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so what can we do now is the most important thing. And I would hope that out of goodwill for the collaborative nature of this term of council, that one of my colleagues who oppose the bylaw will put forward a reconsideration motion and enable us to vote that bylaw back into power. It is exactly one of those fiscal frameworks that enables us to do so much more without relying on our taxpayers as the purse, right, at the bank. So other municipalities who have passed and implemented their vacant unit tax.
It's done very well in Vancouver.
Very well in
Toronto,
Vancouver. Excellent in Toronto. Ottawa just recently had their first year. They originally projected very conservatively, like we did in Hamilton, that maybe there'll be 1,000.
Yeah.
They far exceeded their conservative estimates and brought in $10 million in year one alone. Meanwhile, Windsor on Monday just passed their vacant unit tax at a 3% rate. So I think there's a lot for us to consider here as a group of councillors, and really say, like, for those who opposed it and felt like it's too much administrative overhead to implement this tax, then perhaps we should consider increasing it.
So, I mean, to that point, you're saying, they got $10 million from houses that just sat empty in the city of Ottawa.
Yeah. No brainer.
Right, $10 million.
This is why I keep saying it's
because if we're bringing up the budget, there was that 14.2% number.
Exactly.
I mean, that number is hopefully not going to be what it is.
Not enough.
But we talked about Bill 23 already. I believe I've been told it's about 6% directly results from that bill there. That there's really nothing you can do about it. What's your thought process going into the budget process?
Well, so before we pivot to the budget, 30% of all of our residential properties in Hamilton are owned by investors. They're not people who actually live in the homes. So that 30%, that's 30 out of 100 homes, right?
Yeah.
And housing units that are currently not owned by Hamilton residents. So when we talk about the vacant unit tax, it is really important for us to understand the stakes and the numbers that we're talking about here. Number one, we need those units opened up to help us address the housing crisis. If those are going to be market rent rates, it enables us as a city to work with those landlords and say, if you're willing to take folks off of our staggering lists of people who are looking for housing, we can go into an arrangement with you for a rent subsidy to help ensure that tenant can make their rent every month. Those are the kinds of solutions we need to be focused on if we're going to be a council that is going to deliver outcomes on housing.
It seemed like that's where, when we were talking about the tiny shelters, when somebody says, well, what if there's somebody who can open up their basement? That seemed like people were like, I'm not opening my basement. I'm not going to invite people in. But it seems like you're trying to get those landlords, corporations to say, yes, we will help you, but you need to be open with us.
Yeah, you've got a house that's legitimately livable in. Yeah. You're keeping it purposely empty because you're speculating that you're going to make more money keeping it vacant and putting it back on the market in a year or two's time than you are from collecting rent. And that has been, we have to be very careful in talking about this because it gets skimmed over too often. That is part of why we are in the housing crisis to begin with. Is that land speculation and folks who are, I appreciate the folks who are like trying to figure out, how do I not work so hard, or how do I make sure that my kids are set up or my future generations are set up with wealth so that they can prosper, because things are looking pretty scary these days as a society. I can appreciate what's motivating people, but they're not looking at the impact of those decisions. Having thousands of units sitting vacant is the reason we have folks living in encampments right now. It is part of the reason. Sure, there's other circumstances those individuals are going through, but it is a direct pipeline to the crisis that we're experiencing. So that said, I also have had the privilege of being council's representative to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a policy wonk over here. And so I'm really happy to be working with my counterparts across the country to try and also recognize that the federal government has a role to play in order to alleviate the burden on our municipal taxpayers. Link back to the budget. We have a duty and obligation as councillors to spend beyond, I think, what has been traditionally determined as the role of a city councillor, to just focus on the parochial retail politics of service delivery for our residents, and actually tackle the crises and the magnitude of the issues that are before us. Previous terms of council talk about it as downloading. I say that we have a reality that we need to contend with, and each of us have been elected to serve. So we need to start thinking about actual tangible solutions here that are systemic in nature and that provide the scale of outcome that we need to if we want to be held accountable to continue to occupy those seats. If you're in the way and preventing work from happening, I think it's really important that Hamiltonians pay attention to what's happening around that council table so that we can be held accountable.
To that point, there's so many meetings, right?
God.
So I'm telling you,
it's true.
I'm telling you, there's so many meetings. There's general committee.
It's true.
And some of the meetings go like 8 hours, right? And we're seeing the local media, as a part of that, collapsing a little bit. So how would you suggest people stay informed on these issues if I don't want to watch a overhead cam of council? And right, so what would your advice be to someone to be a more informed citizen in these times?
This is where the show becomes so important, and so many shows like this one, where our cable television is still in operation and going as strong as you can with what you have. It's why it's so important that councillors like us respond to your invitations and show up and have this conversation. It matters so much to our residents for them to be able to see us accessible to them. The other is each one of us, individual councillors, have to pivot to a new strategy. I've been working on a pretty robust social media campaign for a while, but then there's all my residents who still rely on the stuff that comes in mail to their doorfront. So I have to make sure I have enough room in my budget to have an annual newsletter. Now I need to contemplate, does that need to be a newsletter 4 times a week? Or sorry, 4 times a month.
4 times a week.
4 times a year. 4 times a year.
I got you. There we go.
And I think it's really important to sign on to your local councillor's e-newsletter. All of us send out e-news once a week. In terms of the major work that we're up to. And
podcast appearances that you were on.
We'll plug that into our e-newsletter. We'll plug that into our social media and really work with our local social media, our local media with our own channels so that we're supporting each other and helping reach more Hamiltonians as possible.
Give me a reason. We've talked a lot about things that are not so great. Give me a reason to be optimistic about what's going on. It's Christmas. We got our decorations, our fantastic official set designer Chantel Grillo did a fantastic job.
It looks fantastic in here.
You're our first guest on the Christmas themed
Perfect. My birthday's on December 24th, so it feels even better.
There you go. Give me a reason to be optimistic about going out that door today.
Honestly, there's so much to be optimistic for. Part of it is our Hamilton residents. 40% increase in the number of families and households accessing food banks. Yet thousands of residents showed up to the holiday train with food bags in hand and ready to make donations to Hamilton Food Share. And then that matching contribution from the holiday train, plus the $1.6 million that council moved to help infuse food access in our community. I think, fundamentally, at the end of the day, the thing that keeps me feeling optimistic is that we've got such a caring community. There's tons of compassion. I understand that folks are getting a little tired of being asked to contribute. But honestly, when our citizens are most vocal and they are most engaged, that's when this council is able to take the strongest stand possible, not only to deliver for our local community, but also keep our provincial and federal government aligned.
Councillor Nann, I really appreciate you making the time to come up to the studio here at 4 Innovation Drive, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.
My thanks to Councillor Nann for joining me today, and my thanks to you as well, because we could not do the show without your support, so make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcasts wherever you get your favorite podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or you can watch us on YouTube. For all the information, just go to chch.com/podcast. My thanks to Chantel Grillo for directing today's episode, and one more time, thank you for watching and or listening. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Butko. Have a great day.